Good morning, Year 4. Happy Monday and welcome to another lesson of Christian Ed. We have our final characters, at least I think it'll be our final ones that we learn about before we get into our project. Now, these characters weren't necessarily the apostles that we've been learning about. So far, Paul, Peter, and Barnabas, you would call them sort of apostles, that they were the disciples and they have become apostles, the teachers. These characters sort of supported Paul, similar to Barnabas, but they were definitely key people in building the early church. So I'm going to read off my little script that I've typed up all about them. So Priscilla was a Christian missionary. So she was someone who would go out and teach others about Jesus. She was a teacher and a leader in the first century church. And it's interesting to note that in the Bible, her name is referenced before Aquila's, which was her husband. It's always referenced Priscilla and Aquila, which isn't common where a woman's name is mentioned before the man's name, which gives us a clue that she was an important woman and possibly had a higher ranking or higher social status than Aquila. She married Aquilla, interesting name, I know, who was a Jewish tent maker and leather worker. And they were friends of Paul and feature throughout the Bible in Acts. Priscilla and Aquila were part of a group of the Roman Christians who still worshipped in the synagogue. However, Claudius, who was the emperor at the time, he expelled all Jews from the city around 49 AD. And it is believed that the reason for this exile, which means sending out of, they couldn't live there anymore, was because of the trouble arising in the Jewish community over the spreading teachings of Christ among them. Remember that the Christians received a lot of persecution. So this is in the time of Paul. The similarities between what was happening with Paul being persecuted for teaching about Christ is happening here. And so they exiled out of Rome. So because they worked in the leather business, they could take their trade with them, and so they decided to go to Corinth, which was an important trading city. And we know that Paul also went to Corinth on his travels. And when they moved there, they met Paul, and they stayed together for 18 months. During this time, Priscilla and Aquila were risking their lives to build the church. In Romans 16, verse 3-4, it says, and this is a letter from Paul to the Romans, it says, "Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus. They risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful for them." So because of the persecution that was happening, they were obviously willing to risk their lives to support the early church and the growing of the church. While Priscilla and Aquila were in Corinth, many people heard the message of Jesus and came to love and trust him. These followers of Jesus gathered together each week in people's homes to worship God and learn more about Jesus. When Paul left, Priscilla and Aquila accompanied him to Ephesus, which is another place that Paul went, and he writes a letter to the church in Ephesus called Ephesians. Where they stayed for a time, they preached, trained, and made their home available to both churches and believers. There they met a guy called Apollos. I'm assuming that's how I pronounce his name. Or Apollo maybe. Maybe the S is silent. Who had great knowledge of the scriptures, but a lack of understanding about Jesus. All he knew about Jesus was from John the Baptist, and he didn't know about his death and resurrection. This was an important message for Apollos to learn, so he was invited home by Priscilla and Aquila, who instructed him more fully. So he learned more about Jesus through them. They were important in the role of teaching others about Jesus, and because Apollos was a great speaker, he would then be able to go out and continue to share the good news, which he does. He travels to another place and would have continued that good work. And Priscilla and Aquila are really important in sharing more about the truth about Jesus, and that is pivotal. Priscilla and Aquila returned to Rome in the mid-50s, so 50 AD, in the mid-50s, where they joined in fellowship of the existing Roman Church and established another church in their own home. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19 in the Bible, it suggests that Priscilla and Aquilla moved back to Ephesus in the early 60s, possibly to avoid persecution of Christians in Rome that increased during the second part of the Emperor Nero's reign. So throughout the Roman Empire, there were different emperors that would come through, and they would impose different laws, and they didn't like the Christians. Romans 16 verse 3 shows that the couple were well known and loved by the Gentile churches. Remember, Gentile churches are the non-Jewish people who chose to believe in Christ. God uses his people to tell others about his son Jesus so that more and more people will trust in him and live with God forever. And God used Priscilla and Aquila to teach others and build his church. If you imagine them as a couple now, right, you've got Priscilla and you've got Aquila, and they're married and they're a couple. If you imagine them now, it's like they were welcoming people inside their homes, and they were praying together, they were worshiping Jesus together, they were teaching about Jesus, they would have talked about stories about Jesus's life and what he taught as well. And then they would go out, those people that came into the home, they would go out and they would tell their friends, and then more people would come. And that is what church is, yeah? Church is a gathering of people learning about God. So they were really important people in building the early church. And it's nice that they're a couple and they showed real hospitality, and that hospitality is welcoming people in and serving others. They put others before themselves. And if you think of the sacrifice they would have had to make of leaving their home and moving around with Paul, that's a big sacrifice to make in the name of God. So that was really important. Today, what you're going to do is record yourself responding to a few questions that is in the PDF. So there's a bit of summary of what Priscilla and Aquila did, but then there's some application of how we can serve in the same way that Priscilla and Aquila did. So I'd really like you to upload that. And yeah, hopefully you like the story. Oh, there's another little clip to watch from Saddleback Kids, which sort of illustrates what I've gone through today. Have a good day. Don't forget to post your video. If you can't get video, you can just do audio. Some of your videos don't record. That's okay. Just share verbally. Make sure you do lots of detail, guys. We don't want to just see, they did this and I can do this. I can be kind. Really think about it, because that's what Christianity is all about. It's about applying the biblical teachings to our own lives. Have a great day.